My name's Paul Salmon, and from 1989 through 1990, I was working on a motion picture called RoboCop 2. Well, let me introduce myself first. My professional name is Paul M. Salmon. In an age of specialization, it's sometimes very difficult for people like myself who hop in and out of different areas to be known for different things. Right now, I'm probably best known as the author of Future Noir, The Making of Blade Runner, because I was around for that production and have done quite a bit of writing and on-camera interviews and other things about it. But I've also worked on movies like Conan the Barbarian, Blue Velvet, David Lynch's Dune as a studio executive, probably close to 100 films, and I've written over 30 books. So it's very funny for me because I'm known for, in the robo world, I'm known for working on RoboCop 1 and RoboCop 2. Being someone who had worked at Orion and was, at that point, still had ties to Orion, but was going independent, I was in-house when RoboCop 2 was being developed. It went through a very convoluted and painful process of birth. At the beginning, Orion offered the same quartet of John Davison, the producer, Ed Neumeyer and Michael Miner, the screenwriters, and Paul Verhoeven to come up. And it was called RoboCop 2 Corporate Wars. RoboCop fell in love with the brain of a woman who was essentially a worldwide computer that controlled everything in Old Detroit and OCP. And RoboCop and this disembodied thing fall in love. And it was a romance. It was an interesting story. And it opened up with Robo coming out of a car and getting shot with a mortar and being blown to hell. Cut 25 years later, and some OCP employee is down poking around in the basement of some warehouse, and here's the shattered RoboCop in a plexiglass case, who's been down there for a quarter of a century. They revive him, and it goes from there. That was their original concept.
Well, Orion Pictures was sort of a place where a lot of independent movies were made at that time, and they had always fostered that and supported that. Their movies were a little more offbeat, a little quirkier than the movies that the big studios were doing, and they were pretty successful.
The studio was in dire financial straits by 1988. Robo came out in '87, was a surprise hit, made at least $50 million domestically, which is a lot of money back then. And so Orion suddenly finding itself with a string of failures was all of a sudden going over the cliff. And it looked like it was going to go out of business. So there was a huge push to have two RoboCops, two sequels, that they felt would put money back in and get the company back on its feet. However, in order to do that, they said you have essentially a 9-month frame to get this film done. And John Davison said, this is crazy. We don't even have a script.
John Davison was the heart and soul of the movie. He could tell you stories about, what had happened in the first movie or how they had gotten such a successful movie together. And so now that we were doing a sequel to it, he was really driving the script, he was driving the look of it, he was driving the casting of it, and the whole tone of it was something that John was responsible for.
John is really extremely supportive. And I think Paul Verhoeven said it best, that John is an excellent navigator. So you're steering the ship, and he's saying, no, don't go that way, or stop and slow down, or let's just wait here for a minute. And John's like just a huge film buff, so his sense of story and cinema history is complete, the most thorough of most people that I know.
It's a review of Back to the Future Part 2 with me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What did they think?
So the plot is only slightly less complicated than last year at Marionville.
Yeah, so we'd always, tried to, develop projects together, and then these studio things would come along, we were able to collaborate.
Neumeyer, Verhoeven, and Miner walked. So then John Davison frantically scouted around, found Tim Hunter, the director who had done River's Edge. A writer's strike was looming, so he has to go to people who aren't in the guild. John then went to Frank Miller because The Dark Knight Returns, which had come out in the 80s and was a totally different take on Batman, making him a darker, more vigilante, ugly kind of character, John thought that might fit the RoboCop universe.
At that point, Frank Miller's reputation was like going through the roof, and he had just, done like some of the most successful comics that had been done, and so bringing him into the mix, it was for me, it was fascinating because I would get to go down to sort of visit him. Sometimes he worked out of a place in downtown in LA, sort of an artist studio, and he had ideas that were strange, iconoclastic, really, really dark.
The exciting thing about working with someone who's doing their first picture is the love and enthusiasm and dedication they bring to something. Frank is with us every moment of the day and night, and is always working to improve the script and to come up with a funnier line or to come up with a better piece of action or business.
He didn't understand the movie business, and we didn't understand the comic business, but you knew that that talent was something that, because of the tone of the RoboCop movies, he would be the right candidate.
So now we have Frank Miller and Tim Hunter, but Tim Hunter was a little slow in developing things, and the clock is ticking. Tim Hunter eventually leaves the production. Now we just have Frank Miller. And then, out of nowhere, Irvin Kershner hasn't done a movie for years, and good Lord, everybody knows him from The Empire Strikes Back. Let me go to Kersh.
Kersh was brought on because he obviously had the technical experience to do it, but he also had kind of a dark iconoclastic side to him as a director. And it was also in homage to what a great job he had done in a lot of his movies in the past.
So now we have 2 weeks to start production. Once it got started, everyone knew that it had to be in the can at a certain time. Kersh and Frank Miller started to work together, but they only had 2 or 3 weeks. So it was insane.
Yeah, I remember Kersh, would like complain. He'd go, I need more preparation. I need preparation. They'll go like, Kersh, the only preparation you're going to get out of this is preparation H.
I had a lot to do with the marketing of the first RoboCop. I did 2 behind-the-scenes featurettes that I produced and directed. I had a high-tech video camera where I was shooting everything that went on behind the scenes to promote the film.
One of the other important people involved in the RoboCop 2 production was the director, Irvin Kershner, responsible for such prior hits as The Empire Strikes Back and Never Say Never Again. I'd like to show you a little bit of a conversation we had on the set one day.
I tell you, when you're in the middle of shooting a film, you stop thinking about theme and stuff. That was all in the pre-production, working with the script and getting it together when you were thinking of theme and of story. Right now, I'm involved in the individual scenes and getting a point of view in each scene and keeping the characters intact and having them interact. It's a contemporary picture about the future, but just a little bit into the future. Yeah, and it has to do with corporate greed and the power of an evil corporation, about people who are automatized, that some of our humanity may be just being squeezed out of us by technology. And it's sort of a cautionary tale about we mustn't lose our humanity.
Well, I had a great experience, maybe the best experience of my career making RoboCop, the original film. I received a phone call from John Davison, who was our producer, and he informed me that they were in fact working on a sequel and wanted me to have a look at the script that was in progress and meet the director, who at that time was Tim Hunter. And so I said, yeah, I'm all in on this one. I'm ready to do it. And I love the character, and it would be fun to really explore the relationship and, the next adventures of RoboCop and Anne Lewis. So that's what got me hooked initially. In the initial script that I read, it just seemed like what was next, and just a natural evolution of these characters and their relationship, and crossing over with the wife. And there was, I think, there was more depth to Anne's character, and in the relationship she had a kind of a little bit of a meteor role, and I liked that. She was very, you could understand the significance of their relationship as partners, which meant something to me, my father being a cop, so I thought, oh, they get it, they really get it. I remember reading the next draft of it, and it just seemed to lose some of the relationship stuff between them. Some of her character development started to slip away, and it just seemed to get a lot darker in a way that lost the humor, and that seemed to be missing for me. So that was the difference.
What happened is that I was in LA doing something, God knows what, and I was on my way to the airport to fly back to New York, thank God, and my agent called as I was leaving my hotel room or something and said, you got to stop on the way to the airport. So I went to the studio, and and I never seen a script, which doesn't matter, I don't really read scripts anyway, so. And I sort of liked, I mean, the whole idea was that I was RoboCop 2. I mean, RoboCop 2 is the name of the movie, and it's like a sequel number 2, but it's actually, I'm RoboCop 2, and I think they say that in the script. And that was sort of fun, and I thought, oh, this is gonna be great, I'll be able to do all this shit. But ended up really not, I was just sort of like it was like a Volkswagen rolling around.
I remember going into the audition, and Irvin Kershner was in there, the director. He said to me, what would you do if a bad, you're the character Angie, and the bad guys attack you, and the bad guys are coming after you, what are you gonna do? And I'm a dancer, so I stuck out my leg like this and did this thing. I said, I'd go like this, and I would just like, like that. And he started cracking up. He started laughing, he started cracking up and laughing, and I started laughing, and we had this really fun, sweet moment, and that's why I think I got the role.
There are many mysteries in Hollywood, one of which is, how did I get this job? But I was lucky. I had moved from Toronto in '87 to Los Angeles. The Fly had just come out, and my agent convinced me to move to California. So from Toronto for 37 years, moved to Santa Barbara. Started doing all kinds of different movies, and one of which was Fright Night Part 2, another one which was a remake of The Blob. So my name was on a list, and I ended up meeting Irv Kershner to interview about a RoboCop 2. And I'd seen the first one, and I knew Yost as well, Yost Vakana, who shot that, and I kind of knew the style going in, and somehow the match was made. There's always a list of cameramen and actors, and it comes down to ding, so I was the one that went ding, I guess.
Peter I had known because we both started acting around the same time in New York City, and he was a really wonderful actor and sort of a cool guy.
Well, it was great to reunite with Peter. We had a wonderful working relationship, and that was certainly one of the highlights of the shoot for me, and some of the other actors. We had a really strong working relationship.
I just remember that when I go to those sort of fittings, I don't really like getting to be chitty-chatty with people. But I do like someone who sort of is encouraging me to go toward things that I'd find interesting. So, I mean, I remember there's this, and this is one of the big conflicts I had in the film with the producers. I mean, I didn't really have it directly, but it sort of impacted me, is that a lot of the costumes that I wore in the film, when they ended up doing a rough cut, they hated what I was wearing in a lot of the scenes. But there's this one scene where I wear this turban. They reshot scenes because they didn't like, number one, my costume, and they didn't like my performance because they thought I was being too funny.
Tom and I liked Tom right away. We talked about what kind of world we were creating as these bad guys. He's this kind of leader, kind of psychopath.
There's a scene in the original script where I address my followers, and they said we're going to get 20, 30,000 extras, and you're going to speak in this huge plaza, which then that whole scene got compressed and put into a news flash where I'm sitting in a cave somewhere, which is a drag.
I was hired as both the executive producer and as the unit production manager, and I was effectively the line producer. So I was responsible for the budget, I was responsible for all the logistics and hiring all of the crew and making sure that the picture got done on time and on schedule. We jumped right ahead, and we'd already figured we were going to do it in Houston. And Houston was a city in which it was a non-union film at that time. The IATSE union was very aggressive about, maintaining their membership, and Houston was a place where we thought we could go and maintain our non-union status and still do a big movie that you could have a lot of production value.
Downtown Houston in 1989, it was a completely different environment than it is now. There was a recession going on, and there were literally executives jumping out of the tops of windows of their buildings when we were there.
Houston's an interesting city. It has streets and roads that lead to Houston from the countryside. It's oil country, but these are called FTM roads, farm to market roads. I didn't know this. Coming from Ontario, okay. By the way, Texas is the biggest. Ontario, twice the size of Texas. Anyway, FTM meant all the streets that we dressed to shoot all night had to be passable, had to be empty by 6 in the morning. And we all looked at each other from California or Canada or whatever, saying, 6 in the morning? Oh, rush hour at 6 in the morning? So the first night, we shoot all night until 5:45. Okay, let's move this stuff, and a few cars will come in. A massive wave of traffic coming to downtown Houston. So that was our suddenly we had a gun at our head. Shooting all night wasn't just, oh my God, here they come. And it was crazy. FTM meant farm to market. And these guys everyone was at their desk at 7 in the morning because they were in the oil business and they were bidding on prices everywhere. They were in the agribusiness, same kind of deal. Whatever it was, 6 in the morning is not the place to jaywalk in Houston. So that was a big challenge, to light all this street. We had condors and maxi brutes, and inside all these buildings, lighting them up, cable everywhere. We had to wrap it all up and move it, and then lay it all out the next night. John Davidson was very adamant that as a sequel, it was going to break new ground, but his motto was, this is in the future, but it's only $1.98 into the future. Not Buck Rogers, not Star Trek. So all the cop cars were Ford Tauruses. They were all painted matte black. There was no flashy insignias. All the money went into RoboCop himself. And number 2, the one I was lucky to work on, RoboCop as a suit had changed. It had gone from kind of a clunky metal / fiberglass thing into this kind of blue look. I kept joking, this looks like a Ford Fairlane because it had a blue cast to it. It wasn't a fabric suit, but it was kind of like armor. I had to light it like a car. There's a difference between specular highlights and planar highlight. So a hard light will give you a ping, and a planar light, which is would be a big wall of white, that the shape of this, a vertical car basically, with arms and legs and a helmet, that would reflect the shape of it and give it more modeling. So that was my mission, to make this RoboCop stand out as, literally when the door opens and he steps out, it's like, my God. It was a new suit. We had to introduce it in that way. And Kirsch was very aware of how to, when you see the snow walkers in Empire Strikes Back, it wasn't like, oh, them again. It was like, wow. Same effect with RoboCop.
Who the hell too?
If some people think that Kirsch was unhappy with the movie, I think Kirsch was he's an older guy and had done a lot of stuff. And he would come down to the set, and Kirsch would get out of his car. It would be like the middle of the afternoon. We were going to do a night shoot, and he'd get out of the car, and he'd sort of look around and go, wow, this isn't how we were going to do it. This is all wrong. And we go, no, Kirsch, this is exactly what you agreed on last night at like 9 o'clock when we left. He goes, oh, no, it's all been changed. It's all been changed. And so then he'd go and he'd walk down the street, and he'd just sort of put his hand on his head and kind of step around. They'd come back with a huge smile on his face and go, I figured it all out. And it's just that he hadn't really thought about it, and he needed that time, but he's enough of a pro that then he, went out and nailed it.
Irv Kershner had a huge career as a very dynamic director, doing broad comedies like The Flim Flam Man, TV movies. He'd done a film with Barbra Streisand called Up the Sandbox, a film with George Segal and Eve Marie Saint called Loving. So when it came to RoboCop, all I knew was how the man who directed The Empire Strikes Back was going to relate to kind of a franchise that had started. As a New Yorker, he was very strong-willed and had this very strong New York accent. Mark, get that camera over here. What the fuck are we waiting for?
Yeah, let me know when Randy has the weapons loaded.
Well, I had worked with Kirsch on Empire Strikes Back. Like a lot of these guys that, you know, you walk away from the experience going like, you know, that could have been a whole lot worse. Is they're very inclusive. You know, they want to understand what you do, what you cannot do, and are more than happy to be told, hey, you know what, if we do it like this, it's like totally going to work. So he was really good in that regard and totally understood the production problems and where he stood. He wasn't he'd been doing it for so long. What was really cool about him was he is like probably the most old school director I had ever worked with. I never worked with, you know, people like Michael Curtiz or anything like that. But, you know, he went back to the early days of television, and he was part of like the renegade young filmmakers back in his day. So he still maintained that kind of, you know, joie de vivre attitude about stuff, you know. So it was like, yeah, he was exciting to work around.
I did not meet Irvin Kershner until I was on location to begin shooting the film. So we didn't have a lunch, a breakfast, or even a conversation before I arrived at location. You know, I was excited about making the movie, and, you know, I've always had really great working relationships with directors. It was kind of an odd vibe. You know, I just kind of put it over here, and he doesn't know me, and I started thinking, well, you know, he's new to this. He's probably anxious and nervous too, and so I think I overlooked what was a natural, not connected thing between us. It was pretty clear that I don't think I fit his fantasy. I loved working with Peter. Obviously the actors, that's always a joy for me, you know, collaborating in that way. I mean, I even thought about quitting at some point because it was so difficult.
As a director, I thought he was great. And I hung out with him a lot. We would eat lunch together every day, which I never do. I tend not to really associate with anybody when I'm working with them very much. Because it can be distracting to the process of being compelling or being present. And I don't want to get all caught up in shit and being friendly and, you know, whatever. I don't talk to people much. I sort of stay by myself. You know, having my own space and knowing that I'm not going to be invaded by bullshit is helpful. But so I spent a lot of time with Kershner, and he was just a great person, and it was fun, and he was smart about acting, and he also hated the script, or a lot of the script, which we shared this sort of distaste for a lot of the changes that were being made when we were shooting.
Frank Miller sat down every single day, and he was there. He was completely cooperative, a lot of fun to work with, under stress, but at the same time just so dazzled that he was working on a film. He would sit and he'd pound out pages, and they would literally rip him out of his typewriter, photocopy them, and send them to the stage. Sometimes he'd be on stage or on set typing. I took a lot of pictures behind the scenes. I had pictures of him like cross-legged, writing pages so that they could do it right there. It's not the way to make a movie.
Belinda Bauer played Fact. She seemed to pull a lot of weight. So she had a line that the line was, "You're nothing but a machine," which makes sense to me. And you're nothing but a machine. Irv, I can't do that. Irv, I'm not. The script throws it away. I'm not doing that line. He'd write something and hand it up to her. She'd pick it up. Nah, I won't say that. So finally, you know, Kirsch, the producer, everyone would say, "Come on." And I said, okay, roll. And actually, what's her line? "You're nothing but a machine. Cut. Open the street."
I spent quite a bit of time with Frank Miller. I remember we had great conversations, and I remember him talking a little bit about pages. There were creative challenges happening, but then a lot of time, Frank, we were talking about his future projects. He was talking about Electra, which he said that I was going to be a guest in Electra. Just by the way, I never said that on camera, but now I'm saying it now. But I didn't do the part.
Well, I think there was a lot of tension on the set, and you know, my understanding and my experience was that he would stay up all night and he was rewriting things, and you know, the script supervisor would come in the morning with a little piece of paper with hand notes on saying, this is the new scene. So I think it was probably hard on a lot of people.
You know, with the white noise, and the black thunder, and the red ramrod, and the...
I mean, I don't know, it's just one of those trippy sort of things. Like there's a scene with me and Frank in the van in the laboratory van that we were, and that scene was really fun. Because Frank's sort of fun to work with as an actor.
Frank, the Benzatrine's got my teeth wiggling. Cut it with scopolamine. 5 mils per. Yes, sir.
Well, Phil Tippett is one of the great geniuses of, visual effects. He had worked on the first RoboCop 1 because Ed 209, the robotic, weapon that OCP had designed, Phil was the guy who then made that work. And for most of us who hadn't worked in visual effects, we had no clue what was going on. We just knew there was a blue screen going up or a green screen and that he was going to make it work. And later when I did Jurassic World, Phil was he was an animation consultant on that. And when we were doing RoboCop 2 and RoboCop 3, he knew how to mimic dinosaur moves, and he was just waiting for a dinosaur movie. So he was just a wonderful personality, and still is an incredible personality and a really, really brilliant guy.
I would go down for weekly meetings with John and Kirsch and in planning on our side, and then I was on set like every day. I was at some point, the schedule kind of changed, and I had to be there for the first and second units that were shooting in day and night. And I remember, right at the beginning of the production, clocking a 72-hour day and being just fucking drained. And then I got conjunctivitis, and then I got a cold, and then we had a rig that we had built for the stunt performers that we would shoot with the stunt performers in this pneumatic thing that would lash them around. That was what the robot was doing. And I was standing in for the stunt double, and there was a malfunction with this thing, and that smashed me against the side of it, and I broke a rib. And so it was like, oh, God, when can I go home?
About a month or so in the production, my face right here started twitching. And when you feel your face is twitching and you look in the mirror and you don't see it? When I looked in the mirror, you could see it. It was a drag. It was really crazy. So I went to a doctor, and he said my 7th facial nerve, it was irritated and swollen, and that it was causing that to happen, and there was nothing they could do except give me steroids, which I really didn't want to do. And I realized that probably the reason it was happening is because I wasn't happy with what I was doing. And so I sort of took a second look at everything I was doing and sort of dropped out of doing movies for a while. And I sort of went back and re-examined what it was that I wanted to do with my work. And I wrote this play called What Happened Was, that was really a movie, but I did it as a play first, and then we shot it, and I directed it, and I wrote it, and I acted in it. And we made a movie of it, and went to Sundance and won Best Movie, it won Best Screenplay, and all of a sudden I had this other career happening. And my face stopped twitching.
When I saw the film, I think the film as a whole is pretty good. I bring a jaded vision to it, but there's some good performances in the film. I had a hard time watching. I hated myself in the movie. That was very difficult.
Yeah, and when I was looking at it, again, what it's saying about corporations and drugs, and it's a commentary, it's relevant.
This magnificent structure will be the seat of leadership for the new Detroit. And what better place for a clean, fresh start?
RoboCop 2 is actually, in my opinion, improved with age. When I first saw it, my heart sank. I just went, oh, we tried our best. I found myself increasingly fond of and a friend with Kirsch. In fact, after Robo 2 was over, he was going to do a remake of Forbidden Planet. And that was going to be Irvin Kershner's last film.
I think that science fiction is one of the legitimate literary forms of our time. I find that science fiction deals with a lot of the problems that the society faces and will face in the near future.
Overall, when you were making movies at that time, for the amount of money that you were making them, everything was hard, everything was difficult. I sensed it was a pretty positive work experience. I mean, for me, I've had some that have been terrible, and I've looked back on this one with pretty good memories.
It's funny, I've done a lot of films. The most fun movies to make are films like RoboCop. So a film like RoboCop was an adventure, literally an adventure, because we would be given a set, and this guy in this blue robo suit and a black Taurus, and he'd pull up and people would get out, and lighting him like a car, and lighting the set so it was moody and scary, was a challenge for me.
Okay.
And I remember talking to Kirsch soon before he died, a couple of years ago, and he was kind of looking back. So with him, I look back, and RoboCop benefited from his vision. A lot of people discount that because you see the credits and they go on forever, and well, he's just the director. But it's a massive deployment based on one man's plan, and he had the plan. And I don't think anyone else really understood that at the time. And looking back, it was a very forceful method of telling a story about a robotic policeman. It's that simple.
Thank you for not smoking.